Walter Henderson had carried Route 14 for 19 years, and the dented red coffee tin by the door at 1247 Calloway Street had never once been empty. A quarter some mornings, a folded dollar soft as cloth, a jar of sweet tea in August. On the 11th of November the tin was empty, and so was the storm door slot that had swallowed 11 straight days of mail and given nothing back. Among that mail was a birthday card postmarked Chicago that Walter had pushed through the slot himself and that no hand inside had ever turned over. He knew the one thing the route teaches a man: the difference between a house gone to visit kin and a house where the mail is quietly burying somebody alive. So he made the call he'd carried for 19 years and never once had to use. What it set loose would empty that waiting room of all the wrong people and fill one chair with the right one, starting with a live 47 years old. To understand why Walter Henderson made that call, you have to understand the route, because by November of that year the route was most of what he had. And he loved it the way some men love a difficult marriage. He woke at 4:40 in the morning, 6 days a week, in a 2-bedroom on Pierce Street that he had paid off in 2019 and still kept the deed for in a kitchen drawer because he liked to look at it. He drank his coffee black and standing up. He left a light on for nobody. His daughter Tanya called on Sundays, and on the Sundays she forgot. He did not call to remind her, because his own mother had taught him that you do not collect on love like it was a debt. The main post office on Tillman opened its case at 6:15. Walter cased his own mail by hand long after the younger carriers had switched to letting the machine do it, because the machine sorted by address and Walter sorted by people. He knew that the Pruitts at 12:03 were expecting a settlement check and watched the box like it was an oven. He knew that old Mr. Eccles at 12:30 could not bend to the low slot anymore. So Walter wedged his mail upright in the door handle where a standing man could reach it. He knew which 3 houses on Calloway had gone over to the management company out of Atlanta. In the last 4 years their porches scraped clean of furniture, their windows fitted with the same gray blinds, their mailboxes now receiving letters addressed to LLCs instead of to people. There were things Walter did on that route that no supervisor would ever clock and no customer was ever meant to see. On the first Tuesday of every month, he carried Mrs. Aldine's groceries up from where the delivery man left them at the curb, because the delivery man would not climb the steps, and Mrs. Aldine, who was 83 and weighed maybe 90 pounds with her coat on, could not. It cost him 4 minutes, he told no one. On the cold mornings he carried a thermos with an extra cup, and when he passed the bus shelter on Hollywood, where a man named June slept under 3 coats, he poured the cup and set it on the bench and kept walking before June could thank him, because being thanked was its own kind of bill, and Walter had learned somewhere young that the cleanest gift was the one nobody could pay back. He did not think of these things as kindness. He thought of them as carrying. A man who carries learns that almost everything heavy is only heavy because somebody is carrying it alone, and the work is mostly just deciding to take an end of it. He had watched the block change the way you watch a tide come in, slow and then all at once. When he started Route 14 in the fall, the street had been mostly families who had come up from Mississippi 2 generations back and never left, who knew each other's grandmothers, who set out chairs on the porch in the evening and called across the yards. The Calloway block had been the kind of place where a man could fall down on his own sidewalk and have 3 doors open before he hit the concrete. Now half the chairs were gone. The new people were not unkind. They were absent in the way that did not feel like cruelty until you needed them. They worked late, parked in the garage, lifted a hand if they saw you, and did not stop walking. They did not know that the woman at 1247 had lived on that street for 51 years. They did not know her name. They had never tasted her sweet potato pie, which she made in a cast-iron skillet, because that was how her own mother had done it, and which she set out on the railing every Easter and every first day of school for any child who came by, until the children stopped coming by. The woman at 1247 was Miss Odessa Greer, and Walter Henderson had been delivering her mail for 19 years without ever once knowing that she had paid for the bicycle that started his whole life. He did not know it. That was the thing about her. She had spent 79 years making sure people did not know it. Miss Odessa was 79 that November. She had come up from Tunica County, Mississippi, in 1961, 18 years old, on a Greyhound with $34 sewn into the hem of a coat and a cardboard suitcase that her father had carried for 2 generations of leaving. Her people had been sharecroppers on land they would never own, and her mother used to say, in the kitchen in the dark before the others woke, that the only thing nobody could take back off you was what you gave away on purpose. Odessa had carried that sentence north the way other people carried a Bible. She had worked, Lord. She had worked. She pressed hair in a kitchen on Vance for 11 years, then ran the steam table at a cafeteria downtown for 19 more. On her feet from 5:30 in the morning, her ankles swelling over the backs of her shoes by noon. She married a man named Odessa Greer who drove a delivery truck and laughed like something breaking open and died of a heart that quit him at 46, leaving her with 3 children and a mortgage of $112 a month that felt, some winters, like the whole weight of the river. She raised the 3 of them on that block. Marcus, the oldest, sharp as a tack and angry the way smart boys get angry when the world is too small for them. Then her daughter, and then the baby. She fed them on cornbread and collard greens and the ham bone, stretched 4 ways, and she never once let them see her cry, because her mother had not let her see it either. And she believed, wrongly, that this was a kind of strength she was handing down. She did one thing in the winter of 1979 that she never told a living soul, but we will come to that. The story has to earn it, the same way she did. By the November we are speaking of, Miss Odessa lived alone. Curtis was 40 years gone. Her daughter Yolanda was in Chicago and called on holidays from a life that had gotten loud and full and far away. The baby, Andre, had moved to Texas chasing work and a woman in that order and sent a card at Christmas with $20 folded inside that Odessa never spent. And Marcus she did not talk about. She kept her house the way she had always kept it. The front room dusted, the plastic, long ago, taken off the good couch because there was no longer anybody to keep it nice for. A framed photograph of all 3 children at Andre's high school graduation on the mantel, going yellow at the edges. She kept her own hair under a satin bonnet at night and pressed it herself on Saturdays with a comb she heated on the stove, because the girl who used to do it had closed her shop and Odessa would not pay $45 to a stranger at the mall. She lived on $1,114 a month from Social Security and a small church pension, and she did the arithmetic of it the way she had done arithmetic her whole life, out loud, at the kitchen table, on the back of the light bill. The light bill itself ran $61 in the mild months and $140 in January when the old furnace wheezed. She bought the dented cans from the discount rack at the corner store because a dent never hurt the food inside, only the price, and she stretched a fryer chicken across a Sunday dinner and a Monday soup and a Tuesday of picking the bones clean. She tithed $30 to Greater Mount Calvary on the 1st of every month before she paid herself $1, because her mother had taught her that you give off the top and not off the leftover. And she had never in 51 years missed it. And every Easter and every first day of school she still made the sweet potato pie. She made it, though the children who used to come no longer came, made 2, set, one on the railing and ate 1 slice of the other, and gave the rest to whoever the day brought, because stopping would have meant agreeing that the block was gone, and Odessa Greer did not agree to things by quitting them. And every morning, rain or shine, she set the red coffee tin on the porch rail by the door. She had been doing it for 19 years. since the day a new mailman with sad, careful eyes had started coming up her walk. She did not know why she had taken to him so. She told herself it was just neighborliness, the kind the block used to have. A quarter for the man who climbed her steps in the heat. A jar of tea in August. A folded dollar on the cold days, because she could see he stood out in it and somebody ought to. She did it the way she did everything that mattered, quietly, without explanation, expecting nothing back. She did not know that the man's name was Walter Henderson. She did not know that 47 years before, in a different part of the city, in the worst winter of her own life, she had left a red coffee tin, exactly like that one, on a different porch, with $18.17 inside it and no name attached, for a family she had never met. Because the woman of that house had pressed Odessa's hand at a bus stop and said she did not know how she was going to keep her boy in shoes, and Odessa had walked home and counted out everything she could spare and given it away on purpose, the way her mother said. The boy in that house had been 11 years old. His name was Walter Henderson, but on the 11th of November, Walter knew none of that. He knew only that the tin was empty and that he had filled the box for 11 days, and that the green carrier alert card in his satchel had a phone number on it, and that he was going to use it. Now we have to go a little wider because the river has 2 banks, and the second one runs through a glass tower in Atlanta 400 miles away, on the 11th floor of a building with Miss Odessa's son's name nowhere on it but his fingerprints on everything. Marcus Greer was 59 years old that November, which made him older than his mother had been when his father died. A piece of arithmetic he did not let himself do. He was the regional director of operations for a company called Meridian Care Group, which owned and managed 23 long-term care facilities across 4 states. He was good at it. He was, in fact, exceptional at it, which is a different and lonelier thing. He could walk into a failing facility and tell you in 90 minutes what was wrong with it, and most of the time what was wrong with it was that the people running it had stopped seeing the residents as anything but a census number and a reimbursement code. He fixed that. He was famous, in the small world of people who ran such places, for the speech he gave new administrators, the one where he said, "Nobody in that bed is a bed. Every one of them was a child once that somebody walked the floor with at 3 in the morning. He gave that speech in a windowless training room in Birmingham 6 days before the social worker first called him. There were 19 new administrators in folding chairs with their lanyards still stiff, and Marcus Greer stood at the front in a charcoal suit and told them about a woman he had once found, early in his career, in a facility he was sent to turn around, a woman who had been in the same bed for 2 years and whose chart listed no visitors ever, not one. He told them how the staff had stopped using her name, how she had become room 9, the way an object becomes the place it sits. He told them he had pulled a chair up to that bed and asked the woman to tell him about herself, and how it had taken her a long time to believe the question was real, and how when she finally answered, the first thing out of her mouth was the name of a son who had not come. Every silence in this building, Marcus told the 19 new faces, his voice doing the thing it did, going quiet so they had to lean in, is somebody's family deciding that paying is the same as caring. It is not the same. Do not let it be the same here. And the 19 of them wrote it down, and one of them cried, and Marcus Greer drove home alone to a condo with no photographs in it and did not call his mother, and could not have told you that he had just described, in front of strangers, the exact crime he was 6 days from committing. He believed it. That was the thing that would have broken your heart about Marcus Greer, if you had known the rest. He's believed every word of it, and he had not spoken to his own mother in 19 years, and he could not have told you, if you put a gun to his chest, exactly why. He could have told you the surface of it. He could have told you about the winter of 1979, when he was 12, and his mother sat him down at the kitchen table and told him he was going to go live with his Aunt Virgie in Chicago for a while. He could have told you how it felt at 12 to be the one chosen to leave, to be packed onto a bus while his brother and sister stayed in the only house he loved. To understand, in the wordless way a child understands the things that ruin him, that he had been the one she could afford to let go. He had spent 47 years being the boy his mother gave away. He had built an entire self out of it. He had become a man who would never be let go of because he held all the strings. A man who walked into rooms full of the abandoned and the warehoused and saw to it that they were not forgotten, and went home alone, and did not call the woman who had taught him, in one afternoon at a kitchen table, exactly how much it costs to be left. He did not know about the $18.17. He did not know that his Aunt Virgie's apartment in Chicago had a back bedroom with a real window and a desk, and that the school 3 blocks from it would put a boy like Mark on a track that the school 3 blocks from Callaway Street could not, and that his mother had known this, had found this out by riding 2 buses to the library and asking a librarian to help her read a thing. She was ashamed. She could not read fast enough, and had made the worst decision of her life with her eyes wide open, sending away the child she loved most precisely because she loved him most. And never explaining it. Because explaining it would have meant saying out loud that she could not feed all 3, and her mother had not raised her to say such things out loud. He did not know that she had written him a letter every single month for 11 years. He did not know, because she had never mailed a single one. This is the thing the story has been circling, and it is time to set it down plainly so that what comes later lands the way it should. In the bottom drawer of Miss Odessa Greer's bedroom dresser, under a folded quilt that her mother had pieced from feed sacks in Tunica County, there was a shoebox. And in that shoebox there were 132 letters, addressed to Marcus, sealed, stamped with stamps that had gone out of date decades ago and never sent. She wrote them the first Sunday of every month. She told him about the block, the weather, his brother's grades, the price of pork. She could not put it in writing any more than she could say it. So she wrote everything around the hole and sealed the envelope, and could not bring herself to walk it to the box. Because what if he read it and it was not enough? What if she explained the unforgivable thing, and he forgave her, and then she would have to forgive herself, and she did not know how to do that. So the letters stayed in the box, 132 of them, the arithmetic of a silence, 2 banks of the same river. A son who believed he had been thrown away. A mother who believed she had done the only loving thing she knew how to do and had been paying for it in a currency of cents for 47 years. And a mailman who had spent his whole working life carrying other people's words from one to another, standing on her porch on the 11th of November, holding 11 days of unread mail, dialing a number. There is a particular grief in how close 2 people can stand for years without the ground between them ever giving up its secret. For 19 years, Walter Henderson had climbed those 4 concrete steps. For 19 years, Odessa Greer had heard him come. She knew his step from the substitute carriers, steps the way you know the difference between family and company knocking. She had pressed a quarter into the seam of the day for him more than 5,000 times. And twice she had come to the door in her housecoat to take in a registered letter, and they had stood 18 inches apart. The boy from 1979 grown gray, and the woman who bought his bicycle grown old, and signed their names on his others' lives and said only morning, and morning to you, and stay warm now, and gone back inside their separate houses, separate decades, separate halves of the same broken loaf, and never once felt the floor shift. The miracle was not that the secret came out. The miracle was that for 19 years it almost didn't. That 2 people raised on the same sentence in the same kitchen dark could pass that close and that long and the world not bother to tell them. It took a stroke and 11 days of mail and an empty tin to make the ground finally speak. That is how most of the important things get said in this life. Too late to be easy, just barely in time to count. The welfare check happened at 2:17 that afternoon. Walter did not go inside. That was not his to do. He gave the dispatch the address and the count of days and the detail about the tin, which he could not have explained the importance of, and which turned out to matter, because the responding officer was a young woman named Officer Petway, whose own grandmother had kept a candy dish for the same reason, and who therefore understood when Walter said the tin had been full for 19 years and was empty now, that this was not nothing. They found Miss Odessa on the floor of her kitchen, between the table and the stove, where she had been for the better part of 2 days. She had gone down on the 9th, reaching for the kettle, her left side gone strange and slow on her, in a way she had told no one about because there was no one in the house to tell. She was conscious. She was. The paramedics would write, alert and oriented to person and place, which meant she knew who she was and where she was, and what it meant that she was on the floor, and the phone was on the wall 7 feet away, and might as well have been on the moon. She had lain there and listened to the mail come through the slot 2 more times. She had heard the careful, familiar weight of the carrier's step on the porch. She had wanted to call out and could not make the sound large enough. She had thought, in the long hours, about her mother's kitchen in Tunica, and about Curtis laughing, and about a bus pulling away from a curb in 1979, with a 12-year-old's face in the window. And she had said out loud, to the empty house, in the soft, cracked voice of a woman who had stopped expecting an answer, "I'm sorry, baby. Mama's sorry." They got her to Baptist Memorial at 3:04. Stroke the left middle cerebral artery outside the window for the clotbuster. The kind of thing where the doctors talk in careful tenses about what function might or might not come back. They stabilized her. They put her in a bed on the 4th floor with a view of a parking structure. And they began the work that hospitals do, which is partly medicine and partly paperwork. And the paperwork is where Miss Odessa Greer's family failed her in a way that no statute could quite name, because a hospital, when it admits a patient who cannot fully speak for herself, it needs somebody to speak for her. It needs a surrogate, a next of kin, a name on a line, a voice on a phone that will say yes to the feeding tube or no to it, that will decide between the rehab facility and the nursing home, that will sit in the small room with the social worker and the chaplain and make the choices that a body in that bed can no longer make for itself. The hospital found the names easily enough. Odessa had filled out a form years ago in her careful schoolteacher hand, the kind of hand that women of her generation practiced because it was one more thing nobody could take back off you. Marcus Greer, Yolanda Greer Pope, Andre Greer, 3 children, 3 phone numbers. A social worker named Denise Okafor started calling at 4:30 that afternoon. This is the part of the story where the title earns its first line, and it is not dramatic in the way you might expect. There was no screaming. No one slammed a phone down. The children of Odessa Greer skipped the hospital the way water skips a stone, by the simple physics of not stopping. Yolanda, in Chicago, picked up on the 4th try, 2 days in. She cried, really cried, the kind that surprises the person doing it. And then she explained, around the crying, about the 2 jobs and the grandbaby and the cost of a last-minute flight, and how Mama and her had a complicated history, and how she would send what she could. She sent $200 through an app and asked the social worker to please keep her posted, and meant every word, and did not come. Andre, in Texas, did not pick up. He texted on the 3rd day, "Is she going to make it?" And when the social worker who had done this for 14 years and knew that text for what it was, wrote back that his mother was stable but needed family to help make decisions about her care, Andre wrote, "Marcus handles all that. Ask Marcus." And went quiet. And Marcus. Denise Okafor called Marcus Greer's cell phone at 4:52 on the first afternoon. It went to a voice in a smooth, competent baritone that identified him as Regional Director of Operations for Meridian Care Group and asked the caller to leave a detailed message. She left a detailed message. She left another the next morning. On the 3rd call, a Tuesday, at 9:15 a.m., he answered. There was a silence on the line after she said her name and the words Baptist Memorial and your mother. A silence so long that Denise checked to see if the call had dropped. Then Marcus Greer, a man who had spent 30 years of his life making sure that nobody else's mother lay alone and forgotten in a bed, said, in a voice with all the warmth pressed out of it, "I'm not the contact for that. Sir, you're listed as her. I understand what I'm listed as." A breath. The sound faint of a man in a glass office turning his chair toward a window, 400 miles away. "Whatever she needs, send the bills to me. I'll cover it, all of it. But I'm not going to be able to come. Mr. Greer, it isn't only the bills. Your mother can't make her own care decisions right now, and we need a family member who can. Then you'll need to talk to my sister. Your sister asked me to talk to you." And there it was, the whole machinery of a family laid bare in a phone call. The bills he would pay and the chair he would not sit in. The money that was easy and the presence that was impossible. The lie a man can build a life on top of so completely that he no longer hears it as a lie. "I'll cover all of it. I'm not going to be able to come." A man who would buy his mother anything, except the one thing she was lying in that bed needing, which was for somebody who belonged to her to walk through the door. Marcus Greer hung up the phone at 9:19 a.m. and sat very still in his 11th floor office, for a length of time he could not afterward account for. And then he opened his laptop and answered 41 emails before lunch, because that was a thing he knew how to do. And 400 miles north, his mother lay in a bed by a window with a view of a parking structure. And the social worker closed her file with a soft and practiced grief, and the neighbors on Calloway Street, the new ones, did not call because they did not know. And the old ones were mostly gone or could not drive at night. For 3 days, the only person who came to see Miss Odessa Greer was the one person in the city who did not yet know her name. Walter Henderson found out which hospital from Officer Petway, who was not supposed to tell him, and told him anyway, because of the tin. He finished Route 14 on the 3rd day at 3:40 in the afternoon. He went home and showered and put on the gray suit he wore to funerals, the only suit he owned, and he drove to Baptist Memorial and parked in the structure she had a view of and did not know it. He stopped at the gift shop in the lobby and stood for a while in front of the flowers, which all seemed wrong, too loud, too much like a thing you brought to a stranger. In the end, he bought a small jar of honey because it was the most local-looking thing on the shelf, and because his own mother used to say that honey kept, that it was the one food that never spoiled, that they had found it still good in the tombs of kings. He did not know yet that this was kind of thing Odessa Greer's mother used to say too. He did not know yet that he and the woman upstairs had been raised on the same handful of sentences, passed down the same buses out of the same delta, 2 strangers carrying the same mother tongue. He took the elevator to the 4th floor. He asked at the desk for the room of Miss Odessa Greer, and the nurse, see suit and the honey and the careful sad eyes, assumed he was family and told him. And he did not correct her, because by then he had decided that somebody was going to sit in that room, and it was going to be him. He found 4 East, room 412. He stood outside the door for 10 full seconds, the way he had stood on her porch, the honey jar going slick in his hand. Then he knocked, the way you knock when you are not sure the person inside can answer, soft and then a little less soft, and he went in. The room was dim and full of the small mechanical sounds that hospitals make at the edge of hearing. Miss Odessa was propped up against 2 pillows, the left side of her face slack in a way that the right side seemed to be apologizing for. Her hair was uncovered, gray and thin and uncombed, and Walter understood without being told that this was the indignity that would have hurt her most. To be seen by anybody with her head bare and unpressed, and he understood too that he must never let her see that he had noticed. "Miss Greer," he said, "it's Walter, from the mail." Her good eye moved to him. It took a moment to find him, and then it found him, and something in it sharpened, surfaced, came up out of the deep water of the stroke like a fish rising. The right side of her mouth worked. The word came out cracked and slow, and entirely clear. "Coffee tin," she said. He had to sit down. There was a vinyl chair beside the bed, the kind they keep in those rooms for the family that does not come. And Walter Henderson sat down in it and set the honey on the rolling table and put his big careful hands on his knees and could not speak for a moment. "Yes, ma'am," he said finally. "That's me. 19 years. He swallowed. "I filled your box for 11 days. I'm sorry. I should have called sooner. I should have known sooner." She made a sound that he realized, after a second, was meant to be a laugh. Her right hand crept across the blanket toward him, and he took it, because there was nothing else a decent man could do, and her hand was small and dry and stronger than it had any right to be. "You came," she said. And there it was. 2 words. He came. 3 children with 3 phone numbers in a folder at the nurse's station, and a parking structure full of cars, and a whole city of people who did not know, and the only hand reaching across that blanket was reaching for the man who carried the mail. "I came," Walter said. "And I'm not in a hurry, Miss Greer. I'm off till Thursday. I'll sit a while, if that's all right." He sat for 2 hours that first evening. He talked because she could not, and he was not a talking man, so he talked about the route, which was the only subject he was fluent in. He told her about Mr. Eccles and the door handle. He told her the Pruitt settlement check had finally come, a registered letter. He'd made the old man sign for it twice, for the pleasure of it. He told her the management company out of Atlanta had bought the Tolliver house, and he didn't care for the gray blinds. She listened with her one good eye, and twice she squeezed his hand at the right place in a story. And once, when he mentioned the sweet tea in August, the right side of her face lifted into something that was trying with everything. It had to be a smile. A nurse came in at 7:30 to check her lines and found a man in a funeral suit holding the patient's hand and telling her about a parking dispute on Callaway Street. And she did the math wrong in the kind direction and wrote "son" in the chart with a question mark and left them be. He came back the next morning at 9, and the morning after that. On the second day, he brought a thing he had bought at a beauty supply store on Jackson Avenue, a place he had never set foot in before, and stood in for a while feeling enormous and out of place among the rows of satin and oils, until a young woman behind the counter took pity on him. He brought a satin head wrap, deep blue, because he had seen the bonnet detail nowhere and understood it anyway. Understood from his own grandmother that a woman of Miss Odessa's generation would rather be seen with her soul bare than her head, and that the uncombed gray she could not fix herself was a wound the hospital did not know it was leaving open. He did not presume to touch her hair. He asked the day's nurse, a heavy-set woman named Patrice, who had grown up 2 streets over from Callaway, and knew exactly what the wrap was for, and Patrice combed Miss Odessa out gentle as Sunday, and wound the blue satin around her head, and when it was done the old woman's good eye filled, and she did not have the words yet, so she found Walter's hand and pressed it once, hard, the whole language of it in the one press. After that, she held her chin differently in the bed. A small thing. The kind of small thing that is the entire difference between being a patient and being a person. And the kind of small thing nobody on a payroll had thought to do. When the visiting hour ended, Walter stood and said he'd be back in the morning, and meant it, and Miss Odessa's hand tightened on his and would not let go, and she said, with great effort, the most words she had managed yet, "Don't tell them I let it get bare." He did not know what she meant. He thought she meant the house, the dust, the unpressed hair, the small empire of dignity she had defended for 51 years and could no longer hold. He said, "No, ma'am, nobody's going to hear that from me." And he meant the dust. He did not understand until later that she meant the coffee tin. That in the long hours on the kitchen floor, the thing that had shamed her was that for the first time in 19 years there had been nothing in the tin for the man who climbed her steps, and she had not wanted him to think, even for a day, that she had stopped. He found out the next morning, and the morning after, that the whole river turned over and showed its bottom. It came through the box. The way everything in this story came through the box. It came because Walter Henderson, on his day off, drove back to Calloway Street to bring in Miss Odessa's mail so it would not pile up and shame her again, and let himself into her house with the key Officer Petway had logged and left under the third flower pot, and stood for a moment in the front room of before, whose hand he saw the photograph on the mantel. 3 children at a graduation going yellow. He saw the plastic gone from the couch. He saw on the kitchen counter a second red coffee tin, the everyday one, the one she scooped her morning grounds from, identical to the one on the porch rail, and something moved in him that he could not name. And he saw, because he had set the gathered mail down on the dresser in the bedroom while he straightened the quilt that had slid half off the bed, the corner of a shoebox sticking out from the bottom drawer where the quilt had been hiding it. He should not have opened it. He knew he should not. But a carrier's whole life is the question of what belongs to whom, and the box had a name on the lid in faded marker, written and traced over and written again, the way you write a name you are trying to keep alive. Marcus. 132 envelopes, stamped, sealed. Addressed in a careful schoolteacher's hand to Marcus Greer at an address in Chicago that the topmost ones, the oldest ones, gave, and that the newer ones did not, because she had lost track of where her son lived, never sent. 47 years of First Sundays. He did not open the letters. Some lines a man does not cross even with the box already in his hands, but he read the dates penciled on the backs, the way she had numbered them, 1 through 132, and he understood that he was holding the weight of a silence so heavy it had broken a family in half, and that the woman in room 412 had been carrying it on the same back that had carried him $25 up her steps every morning for 19 years. And underneath the shoebox, wrapped in a square of waxed paper soft with age, there was a third coffee tin. This one was old. The red had worn to rust at the seams, and taped to the bottom of it, brittle and yellow, was a strip of paper, and on the paper, in the same hand, younger, the loops not yet steadied by the decades, it said, $1870, Henderson family. 1979. He don't know it was me. Keep it that way. Walter Henderson sat down on the floor of Miss Odessa Greer's bedroom, a 58-year-old man in his good gray slacks, with the tin in his lap, and the room went very quiet and very loud at once, because he knew the number. He had known it his whole life. His mother had told the story until it wore smooth as a creek stone. The winter of 1979, the winter his father left, the winter she did not know how she was going to keep him in shoes. The winter a red coffee tin appeared on their porch, with $18.17 in it and no name, and how that money paid the light bill and bought a used bicycle from a man 2 streets over, and how the bicycle got Walter a paper route, and the paper route got Walter up at 4:40 every morning before God was awake, and showed an 11-year-old boy that he was the kind of person who could be counted on to carry things to people's doors. His whole life, the whole shape of it. A mailman because once, when it counted, somebody he never met made sure he had a way to carry. His mother had prayed for that woman every night until the night she died. A woman she could only call the coffee tin angel, and Walter had grown up believing she was a story, the way children believe in a kind of weather that no longer comes. She was in room 412. She had been on his route for 19 years. He had been bringing her mail and taking her quarters, and never once known that he was climbing the steps of the only person on earth who had reached down into the worst winter of his childhood and decided, on purpose, that he would have a chance. The thing nobody could take back off you was what you gave away on purpose. He had heard that sentence too, from his own mother in his own kitchen, in the dark before the others woke. He had thought it was hers. It was Odessa's mother's. It had come north on the same bus, the same hem, the same suitcase. They had been raised on the same words, he and the woman upstairs, and they had been handing the same gift back and forth across 47 years and 19 of them, and never once seen each other's faces in it. Walter put the lid back on the shoebox. He wrapped the old tin in its waxed paper. He sat on the floor a long time. Then he did the only thing he could think to do, which was the thing he had done his whole life. He decided to carry it to the person it belonged to. It took him a day to find Marcus Greer's number, which was not hard, because Marcus Greer's number was on a card at the nurse's station that the social worker had been calling for 3 days. And Denise Okafor, when a man in a gray suit who had been sitting with her patient for 2 days asked if he could be the one to try, looked at him a long moment and decided to break a rule, because she had been doing this for 14 years, and she knew the difference between a stranger and family. And she had stopped believing the 2 words meant what the form said they meant. Walter called Marcus Greer at 6:10 in the evening, after a workday in Atlanta, when a man is tired enough to answer a number he doesn't know. "Mr. Greer," he said, "my name is Walter Henderson. I carry the mail on Calloway Street. I've been sitting with your mother at the hospital." The silence on that line was the same silence the social worker had heard. The silence of a man going still inside a glass office. And Walter let it sit, because he was a patient man, and because he understood, better than Marcus could have guessed, what was on the other side of it. "She's stable," Walter said into the silence. "I'm not calling to ask you to come. I'm calling because I found something in your mother's house, bringing in her mail, and I think a man ought to be told the truth about his own life, even when it's late. Especially when it's late." "Mr. Henderson, I don't." "There's a shoebox," Walter said, "in her bottom dresser drawer, under the quilt her mama made. It's got your name on it, written over so many times it's near worn through. There's 132 letters in it. She wrote you one the first Sunday of every month, for 47 years. He heard Marcus Greer stop breathing. "She never mailed a one of them," Walter said. "I think you ought to know that before you decide what you decide. A woman doesn't write a letter every month for 47 years to a son she gave away. She writes it to a son she couldn't stop talking to and couldn't make herself face. There's a difference. I've carried enough mail to know there's a difference." And then, because he was a carrier and not a cruel man, Walter told him the rest of it gently, the way you hand somebody a thing that is heavier than it looks. The old tin, the waxed paper, the $18.17, the Henderson family, 1979. "He don't know it was me. Keep it that way." He told Marcus Greer that the woman in that bed had given away money she did not have. In the same winter she was sending her own son north, to a stranger's child she would never meet, and had spent the next 47 years making sure neither of them ever knew. "That's the boy," Walter said, and his voice broke for the first time in the telling, a 58-year-old man crying quietly into a phone in a hospital hallway. "I'm the boy, Mr. Greer. She bought me a bicycle and didn't know my name, and it made me who I am, and I've been bringing her mail for 19 years and never knew her face was the face. Your mother's been a stranger's angel her whole life, and she's lying up here, and the only one who knew to come was the one she never told." Marcus Greer cried for the first time in 19 years on the I-22, somewhere past the Mississippi line, at 1:40 in the morning, alone in a car he had not planned to be driving. He had not decided to come. That was the thing he would never be able to explain to anyone, least of all himself. There had been no decision. He had hung up the phone with the mailman at 6:40 and answered 19 emails. And at 9:15 he had told himself he would go to bed. And at 10:50 he was on the highway, and he did not remember packing the bag that was somehow on the passenger seat. He cried the way men of his kind cry, which is to say he did not know he was doing it until the dashboard lights smeared and he had to slow down. He cried for the boy on the bus in 1979 with his face in the window, and then, somewhere around Tupelo, the crying turned and became something else, because for the first time in 47 years, he was not the boy who had been given away. He was a man who had just learned that the same hands that put him on that bus had been emptying a coffee tin onto a stranger's porch the same winter, and that this was not the math of a woman who did not love her children. It was the math of a woman drowning who had decided, in the cold, with her eyes open, to keep one child afloat and let one stranger's child have a bicycle, and to never once be thanked for any of it, because being thanked was a thing she did not believe she had earned. He had built a fortress out of being unloved, and the foundation of it had just been pulled up by the root, and underneath the foundation there was nothing but a woman who loved him so badly she could not even mail him the proof. He arrived at Baptist Memorial at 4:55 in the morning. Walter Henderson was asleep in the vinyl chair beside the bed, his head fallen forward, his good gray suit creased, because the carrier had not gone home. He had told the night nurse that somebody ought to be in the room when she woke, and she had let him stay because of the way he held the old woman's hand even in his sleep. Marcus stood in the doorway of room 412. He looked at the stranger asleep in the chair that should have been his, and at his mother small in the bed with her hair uncombed, the one indignity he knew she would not want him to see, and he understood at last what the chair was for, and who had been sitting in it, and why, and he did not wake the man. He stood in the doorway for 10 full seconds. Then he crossed the room and he knelt down on the hard floor beside his mother's bed, the way you kneel beside something you are afraid to touch, and he put his face down against her right hand, the good hand, the one that still worked. Odessa Greer woke at the weight of it. Her good eye opened and found her son's gray head bent over her hand, the head she had last seen in a bus window 47 years before, and the right side of her mouth worked and got the word out. "Marcus, I'm here, Mama," he said into her hand. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm here." And Odessa Greer, who had not let her children see her cry because her mother had not let her see it either, who had carried a silence so heavy it filled a shoebox, looked at her son's bent head and made the choice she should have made 47 years before. She let him see it. "I'm sorry, baby," she said, the words she had said to an empty kitchen on the floor, said now to the one they were always meant for. "Mama's sorry. I had to. I didn't know how to tell you I had to." "I know," he said. "I know now. The letters, I know." In the vinyl chair, Walter Henderson woke and saw, and rose, and walked very quietly out of the room, and pulled the door most of the way closed behind him, and stood in the hallway with his hat in his hands, because some rooms a man does not stay in once the right person has finally come. Miss Odessa Greer did not die. This is not that kind of story, and besides, she had too much left to do. She came back slow. The left side stayed slow. It always would. She spent 6 weeks in a rehab facility, and not one that Marcus's company ran, because Marcus had learned something about the difference between paying for a thing and being present for it, and he did not want there to be any distance, ever again, that money could pretend to close. He came every weekend. He took a leave he could not really afford from a career he had built like a wall, and he discovered, the way people sometimes do too late, and sometimes just barely in time, that the wall had been keeping out the only thing he had ever wanted. He read her the letters. All 132 of them, one by one, in the order she had numbered them. Sitting by her bed in a rehab facility outside Memphis, a 59-year-old man, reading his mother her own words back to her, the both of them learning, 47 years late, what had been in the box the whole time. There was no anger left in either of them by letter 30. There was just the long ache of all the Sundays, and underneath it, rising, the thing his mother had named her whole life. She had given it away into a box. He was carrying it back to her, one envelope at a time. It was, in its way, a paper route. He would have laughed at that if he had been the kind of man who saw it, and by the end he was becoming the kind of man who saw it. The recovery itself was not gentle, and the story owes it the truth. It was work, the unglamorous daily labor of a body relearning itself. A speech therapist named Mr. Okonkwo came 3 times a week and made Odessa say words she had said for 79 years, and now had to chase down one syllable at a time, and she wept with the frustration of it twice, and quit it never, because quitting was a thing she did not agree to. She walked the parallel bars, gripping with her good right hand, dragging the slow left foot, counting out loud 9 steps. Then 11, then on the large one marched the length of the rail and back without stopping, and the small room of strangers in wheelchairs applauded a woman they had decided to love. None of it was given to her. She earned every step back the way she had earned everything, on her feet. Out loud, off the top. That was the only kind of healing Odessa Greer would have trusted, and it was the only kind Marcus would let her be offered, because a man does not undo 47 years by writing a check. He undoes it by showing up on a Saturday and counting steps beside the rail. Yolanda flew down in February, finally the grandbaby on her hip, and stood in the doorway of the rehab room and broke, and Odessa opened the good arm and said, "Come here, girl," and that was its own letter, mailed at last. Andre did not come. Andre, it turned out, was a harder country to reach, the kind of son who keeps his distance because the distance is the only thing protecting him from how much the closeness would cost. But he called now. He called on the first Sunday of the month, which nobody had told him to do, and which made his mother put the phone down afterward and sit very still, because she knew, even if he did not, whose Sunday that was. The family did not become whole. Families mostly don't, not all the way. But it became a family that answered the phone, which is more than it had been. And Odessa had learned long ago to be grateful for what the day brought, and not to bill it for what it didn't. Marcus tried, of course, to thank Walter Henderson, the only way a man like Marcus knew how, in the first weeks before he had finished changing. He sat the carrier down in a diner on Chelsea Avenue over plates of catfish and grits, and told him that he wanted to take care of him, that he would pay off his house, that he would set up something for Walter's daughter, that there was no amount that would not be the least he could do for the man who had sat in the chair. And Walter Henderson, who made $28.43 an hour and had paid off his own house in 2019 and kept the deed in a kitchen drawer because he liked to look at it, set down his fork and said no. He said it kindly. He said the house was his because he'd carried it himself, the same way the bicycle had been his because somebody made sure he could carry, and that the giving in his life had never once come with a name attached or a thank you owed. And that was the whole point of it. That was the thing Odessa's mama had carried up out of Mississippi. That was the only inheritance worth a damn. He said a man could not buy back a thing that was given for free without turning it into something it had never been. He said he didn't want money. He said if Marcus wanted to do something, there was a block on Callaway Street that used to know how to open 3 doors before a man hit the concrete and didn't anymore. Maybe that was worth more than a paid-off house. So that is what they did, the two of them, the son and the carrier, in the spring after. Miss Odessa came home to Callaway Street in April, to a house Marcus had not modernized, but had made safe, grab bars where she needed them, and the steps rebuilt so the rebuilt left side of her could manage them. The plastic still off the good couch. The photograph on the mantel, cleaned and reframed, and a new one added beside it. 3 children grown, taken at the rehab. On the day she walked 9 steps without the rail, and on the porch rail, by the door, there was a red coffee tin. There were others now. That was the thing that grew out of it, the thing nobody planned and everybody somehow had been waiting for. Walter Henderson went to his union and to the carriers on the routes that touched his, and they made a thing of it, an informal thing with no name on a form. A carrier on those routes, climbing the steps of a house where an old person lived alone, learned to look at the tin. If the tin had been seen to, the house had seen to. And if the tin sat untouched too many days, the carrier knew, the way Walter had known, that the mail was burying somebody alive on the other side of the door. And they made the call, the one off the green card, the one Walter had carried for 19 years and used once, and that now got used the way it was always meant to be used. Before it was too late instead of nearly too late. The new neighbors learned slowly the way a tide goes back out. A young couple 2 doors down, the ones with the gray blinds the management company liked, knocked one evening in May, because they had seen the tin and finally asked what it was for, and Miss Odessa told them, in her cracked, slow voice, the whole of it, the bus and the hem, and the $18.17, and the woman cried at her kitchen table over a slice of sweet potato pie made in a cast-iron skillet, because that was how Odessa's mother had done it. And, the next morning, there was a coffee tin on their porch rail, too. It got into the church, the way the deepest things on that block always eventually did. The pastor at Greater Mount Calvary heard the story from Patrice the nurse, who had it from the rehab, and one Sunday in June he preached it without using anyone's name. Preached on the woman who gave away what she did not have in the winter. She was losing everything. And on the carrier who climbed the same steps for 19 years, not knowing he was climbing toward the answer to his own life. He did not call it a miracle. He called it what Odessa's mother had called it, the only inheritance worth a thing, the one nobody can take back off you. And he asked the congregation, before the last hymn, to think about whose tin had gone bare on their own street while they were busy. And 3 families set out tins that week. And the church basement started keeping a list, quiet and unofficial, of the old folks on the surrounding blocks who lived alone, and who would check on which. Walter still carried Route 14. He still woke at 4:40. He still cased his own mail by hand. He climbed Miss Odessa's steps 6 mornings a week, and the tin was full again, and some mornings it held a quarter, and some mornings a folded dollar soft as cloth, and in August it held a sweating jar of sweet tea. And now and then, when Marcus was down from Atlanta, it held a slice of pie wrapped in a paper towel, and a note in a careful schoolteacher's hand that said only, "For the man who came." The old rusted tin, the one from 1979 with the brittle strip of paper taped to its bottom, Walter took home. He set it on the mantel beside a photograph of his own mother, who had prayed every night of her life for a woman she could only call the coffee tin angel, and never knew lived 9 miles away. He liked to look at it the way he liked to look at the deed in the kitchen drawer, 2 things that proved a man could be carried, and could carry, and that the distance between those was the whole of a decent life. Some evenings Tanya called from Nashville, and he told her a little more of the story, and she came home for Easter for the first time in 4 years, and Miss Odessa set out 2 pies on the railing. And the children came by, the new ones and the old, and the block remembered for an afternoon what it had been built to be. He took the tea. He took the pie. He left the quarters where they were now, mostly, and told her it was only right, because a thing given on purpose was the one thing nobody could take back, and she had taught him that. Though she still did not entirely believe she had, and that was all right. He had 47 years of proof in a shoebox to argue the case, and the rest of both their lives to make it. The river had 2 banks, and the carrier had finally carried the one across to the other, and the only thing he ever asked in return was that somebody, on every route, on every street where the chairs had gone in off the porches, would learn to look at the tin. I keep coming back to the sun, Marcus. Everybody wants to hate him for paying instead of showing up. I get that. But I'm not sure money and presents are really opposites the way I made them out to be. He was scared people send checks. I've done it. There's a version of him who never drives north, who just keeps paying forever and calls it love. That's the version that scares me, because it's the easy ones. I almost wrote him that way. I'm still not sure I was right to let him off the highway. So here's what I actually want to know. What would it take for you to drive instead of send the check?